Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I'm going to show you guys how to build this very simple dashboard UI. You can see we have a little logo over here. We have a title. We have our icons and all of the navigation links. We have a nice little search bar, but you can see we also have some icons. Typically, you could put, whatever icons you want. And then you have your welcome back text, and then you have these 4 items. So what we're using for this is we're actually going to be using grids. I haven't done any videos on grids, so now this would be a perfect opportunity to actually use them in this video. Now you can also see that this dashboard is actually going to be responsive. So you can see if I resize, you're going to see that item 2 and item 4 will now go down over here, which is pretty awesome. I like it. And if we continue to resize, you can see that the little nav bar over here on the side, it kind of like collapses and it gets rid of the text and only shows the icon. So this is very typical, like a lot of applications do this kind of thing, and it's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, now for this project, you want to make sure you download a vector icon or any image of your choice that you want to use for the logo. You want to make sure you go over to fontawesome.com and grab your Font Awesome kit. That's going to allow us to use the icons, or you can use whatever icon library you want. So I'm going to just paste my kit over there. Okay, and for Google Fonts, we're also just going to be grabbing one. I'm going to be using Poppins. I like this font a lot, and that's going to be pretty much it. So we already have some basic HTML and some CSS. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm actually going to go ahead and go straight into the CSS file. And I'm going to just get rid of the default margin and any padding. You always want to do this because by default certain elements have margin and padding that you may not like. I'm also going to go ahead and just set the height for both of the body and HTML tags to 100%. And for bodies, font family, we're going to set that to Poppins. So, one more thing that I completely forgot is you want to make sure you download the extension Live Server, and this is going to basically allow you to open up your application, and every single time you make a change, it will auto refresh, which is great. So you want to make sure you right click your index.html and then click on open with Live Server. And now this will open up a new window. And as you can see, it says on the bottom of Visual Studio Code that server started at port 5500. And you can see that we have our web page over here. So now every single time I make a change, so I'm going to go here and just say hello, you're going to see that it just auto changes right over there. For some reason though, the styling is not working. Oh, you know what it is? It's because I forgot to include my CSS file, silly. There we go. All right, perfect. There we go. So our styling is working. That's great. So we're going to start off by building out the sidebar. Okay, so I'm going to just simply use a section, and I'll give this an idea of sidebar. And what we want to do is we basically want the sidebar to have our title, the logo. We want to have the links as well. So what I'm going to do is first I'll just give it some CSS styling so we can actually see what the sidebar is going to look like. So I'm going to use a background color, and I have it right over here already. So again, you can use whatever colors you want, but I'm just selecting the ones that I've already used in the project. So this is going to be kind of like a grayish color. We're going to give it a width of, I'll do maybe 200 or maybe 300 pixels. You want to make sure you give it a height of 100%. You also want to make sure you give it a position of fixed, so this will keep the actual sidebar in position at all times. So now if you see over here, we actually have our sidebar. If we were to scroll, the sidebar would stay in place. That's why you want to set it to fixed. All right, now let's go ahead and just set the top to 0. And let's set left to 0. So basically, since we have it positioned as fixed, we can set we can set the offset of how far we want it to be from the top. So let's say, for example, if you wanted it to be 50 pixels from the top, which we're not going to do that, obviously, I just want to show you what this property does. Okay, you would set 50. If you want this sidebar to be on the right-hand side, you could do that as well. Just set the property right to 0. So it will basically be positioned from the right 0 pixels. So basically right over here. But we'll leave it as left for now. And I'll probably give it some box shadow. Nothing too crazy. We'll do maybe 5 pixel blur, 1 pixel spread, and then RGBA. We'll give it a very light opacity, just so you can kind of like see it, but not really fully there. Maybe we'll give like an X offset of probably like 3 or something. I don't know, just so you can just kind of see it. We'll probably play around with it later, though. It's not really a huge deal. Anyways, let's continue. So there's the basic styling that we're going to do. Now later, what we're going to do is we're going to add the transition, but I'll get to that later. Okay, let's continue actually working on the sidebar. So inside the HTML, inside sidebar, we're going to need a section for the title. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a section, and I'll give it an ID. Actually, I'll just use class, and we'll do title container. And I'm going to place the image. So image source speedometer. So that's a vector icon. We're going to give it a width of 40 pixels. Now, if we Alt tab, you can see that it's right over there. But also give it an Alt 2 in case if the image doesn't render. We just call this a logo, whatever you want to call it. So you can see if I change the name, if I show over here, you can see that the image is broken and this is logo. Okay, so let's fix that back. Okay. All right, and now let's go ahead and just give ourselves an H1 tag, and I'll just call this Arizona Analytics. Again, you can call it whatever you want. Now let's go ahead and style this H1. So I'm going to go and reference title container. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just give it a display of flex. The reason why is because I want these two items to be on the same line. We're going to set align items to center. All right, there you go. So you can see that it just centered vertically. And I'm also going to just set justify content. I'll set it to space around. Maybe I'll change it later. But then I'm also going to give it some padding from the top and bottom of 20 pixels and left and right 0 pixels. And I also want to set the H1. I want to give it a bigger, perhaps a bigger font size. We can probably do something like, I don't know, 24 pixels maybe. Maybe that might be a little bit too much, but it won't be too much if we set the font weight to lighter. Okay, I think that's pretty good. That's going to be pretty good. Actually, you know what? I'll probably change it to 22 pixels or 20 pixels. All right, there we go. Okay, great. So now that we're done with the title container, let's move on to the actual links. So with the links, we're going to create another section. Now you can use divs if you want. I'm just going to use sections. And I'll give this a class, and I'll call this links container. We're going to have a lot of containers. And inside this links container, we're going to have another, I'm actually going to use a div for this one. And I'm going to give this a class, and I'm going to call this links. Okay, now inside this div, we're going to have another div. Now this other div is going to hold the icon. Now the reason why we're using a div to hold the icon is because the icon, we're actually going to give that div a fixed height and width, just so that we can actually center it horizontally and vertically so that it stays the same. The reason why we're doing that is because if we don't, some of the icons might actually push the text a little bit more to the right, and you don't want that. It's going to look really ugly and not consistent. So that's why we're going to set a fixed height and width for the icon itself. And we're doing that by putting that icon, the actual icon tag, inside a div. So we're going to basically copy this about 3 more times. Okay. And we're going to first put the icon first. So I'm going to go ahead and get my icon. So I already have the name of it. So the first one I'm going to use FA house user, and if I save, you can see that the icon appears over there. Perfect. Great. All right, now outside of the div, we're actually going to put a span, and this is where our text is going to be. Okay, now typically this would be your link, obviously, but we're just going to leave it as a span for now. And now let's move on to the next icon. So the next icon, we're going to use a chart bar, and that should be for the analytics part. So FA chart bar, and you can see that it's right over there. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The next one is going to be comments. So this is typically for the chat. Okay, there we go. Oh, and I forgot to put the text. Analytics. Okay, and the next one is supposed to be messages or chat, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. We'll just call it messages. All right, now the last icon is going to be for settings. And for that, from Font Awesome, it's called a cog. So you can see right over here, you have the settings, which is great. And we're going to create the text called the settings. Okay, and there you go. So now our next task is to actually put all of these items right next to each other, okay, because right now they're on top of each other. And to do that, you may have guessed, we're going to reference links. We're going to give it a display of flex, okay, and you can it's kind of hard to kind of look at it. If I zoom in a little bit, you might be able to see it. We're gonna actually set the align items to center. So if you see that, it should stay center. I don't know if that really changed anything, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about right over here. If you see, if I highlight everything, you can kind of see like the text is a little bit pushed to the side. That's why we're going to give these icons a fixed height and width. So we're going to go ahead and reference the icon class. We're going to give it a fixed height of 50 pixels, width of 50 pixels. We're not going to give it a background color, but what we're going to do is we're going to give it a display of flex. Then we're going to center both vertically and horizontally. That's what justify content align items will do. And now you can see that the entire text is all on the same line. Well, not the same line, but you can see that it's not pushed to the side like it was before. And I think this looks good so far. So what we'll do is for the links container, which I should reference right over here, we're going to give it some padding, and I'll give it maybe padding from the left and right. Want to be consistent. I'll probably do maybe 15, actually 0 pixels, 15 pixels. I think that looks great. Now let me just zoom out. It's a little bit too small. So maybe for the icon itself, we could probably, we could probably just reference the icon and give it a font size, maybe just a little bit bigger, nothing too crazy. 32 pixels. You want to make sure it's able to fit inside the box itself. If it can't, then it'll kind of overflow a little bit, so you want to be very careful. But I think we'll do 24 pixels. You can always change the fixed height and width as well if you really want to. But I think this should be good enough. And we can also give some padding for the links as well, but we're not going to do that. We'll leave it like this for now. Actually, you know what? I'll actually give padding because it kind of doesn't look that great in my opinion. So we'll reference the span, give it some padding, 0 pixels top and bottom, 15 pixels left and right. Maybe we'll do 20 pixels left and right. There we go. It's not perfectly aligned with this, but it's not the end of the world. All right, so let's go ahead and give the icon a color. So instead of it being black, we can just give it a nice little gray color, and we'll leave the text alone. All right, so that's pretty much going to be it for the sidebar. I'm not going to spend too much time on this part. We're going to move on to the actual content now. All right, so for the content part, this is going to be fairly simple. All we're going to do is we're going to create another div. So you want to make sure you go outside of this section right over here. Okay. And you want to make sure you go over here. And we're going to create another section. Again, you can use a div if you want to. Now I'll give this an ID. And I'll call this main dashboard. Let's just call it main dashboard content. And let's just give an h1 tag to say hello. Now you're going to see that nothing is going to be on the actual screen. The reason why is because we have this sidebar set to position fixed. So it's actually on top of this. It's on top of this section over here. Now we can actually move this entire content over to the right by giving it some margin from the left. So what you can do is you can actually give it 300 pixels. So basically the width of the sidebar, that'll be the margin. So let's do margin left 300 pixels, and now you'll see the hello. You can go a little bit more if you want to, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to set a background color real quick just so you guys can kind of see what happens visually whenever I modify the CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a height of 100%. Okay. So that way this entire thing will span all the way to the bottom. I'm going to give it some padding. We'll do maybe 25 pixels. That might be a little bit too much. I kind of want this, well, we're going to have the search bar, right, align with this. I'll probably do maybe 20 pixels from the top and bottom, and then maybe 25 pixels left and right. Maybe that might work out well. You can always change it up a little bit. Now you're going to notice that when I actually scroll down now, the padding is actually giving us additional height. So to fix that, what we can do is we can actually set box sizing to border box. So this will make sure that the padding as well as margin will be accumulated with the actual total width of the box itself. Okay, so notice how I have border box set, and you can see that now there's no additional height because of the padding. Okay, that's awesome. All right, so I think this itself should be okay. I'm not sure if there's anything else that I need to do with this, but I think this should be fine. I'm going to get rid of the background color now. And if we want to change the padding, we can, but we'll worry about that later. So we need to work on the input box. So if you actually look at the original design, we actually had the input box, and we also had the icons on the right hand side. So we're going to actually use a flex box. Okay, we're going to have a div that's going to hover, or not hover, but it's going to hold these two items. So we're basically going to have a div that's going to hold two other divs, and we're going to set the justify content to space between, so that way they're on opposite sides. Okay, so let's get back to the code, and let's go ahead and let's just give a section, and I'll just call this top section. Not really the best name, but I don't want to spend too much time on these names. But of course, you always want to make sure you give names that will help you remember what this section or whatever this thing is going to resemble. So let's go ahead and let's work on the actual search bar. So we're going to go ahead and I'll just use a div just to change it up a little bit. We'll use an input tag, and you can see right over here we have our input. Let's give it a placeholder, and we'll just do search. Okay, and after that we're going to have the search icon. So the search icon, I'm going to wrap that inside a div. So let's just use the I tag, and then FAS, FA search, that's the icon. Okay, and if you see it over here, there it is. All right, perfect. Let me go ahead and just quickly give this a class called input box. Okay, and let's go ahead and just style this up a little bit. So input box. The first thing I'll do is actually, I'm going to reference the input first. I'll get rid of the border, and I'll get rid of the outline. The reason why you can see this little outline, that's the outline. Okay, so we got rid of the border already. Let's get rid of the outline, so when we focus on it, you won't see that, that outline over there. Okay, so we've got rid of that part already. That's good. Next, what we can do is we can actually style the input box now. So we were styling the input, which is inside the input box. Okay, let me actually move this up here. Okay, and what we'll do is, let me just go ahead and give this a background color. Actually, I'll give it a box shadow, because we need to do that anyways. I'll do 5 pixels, pixel RGBA, and then we'll do 0.1. All right, and we also need to set the display to flex. And what we'll do is we'll set the justify content to space between. The reason why it's going all the way to, it's spanning all the way to the end is because we haven't set a width yet. So let's do that. Well, then maybe 400 pixels. All right, that should be fine. Let's see. So if I click over here, I won't be able to actually focus on this. So the reason why is because the input has a fixed width, I think. So let's just give this a width of 100. So now if I click over here, that will work. If I get rid of width, you can see that I can't click on it, but over here I can. So that's not good. Let's give it a width of 100%. For the input box, let's go ahead and just give it some padding. So maybe from the top and bottom, we'll do 15 pixels, and from the left and right, we'll do 25 pixels. Though I don't really like that too much, so maybe we'll do 5 pixels from the top and bottom. The reason why I don't like it is because it kind of like just goes offset from here, but I think it's really not really a huge deal, if I'm being honest with you. Box, because you guys can play around with this. Again, I'll leave the code in the description. You guys can play around with this and use it however you want. It doesn't really matter. So whatever I do in here shouldn't really affect, what you want to take away from this video too much. Okay. All right, awesome. Now let me go ahead and just change the color of this icon real quick. So I'll probably just reference input box and then we'll change the color. So that's not like the same color all the time, just so that we have different colors. All right, and again, you can change the box shadow however you want, but I'm gonna leave it like that. Okay, now let's move on to the next part. So this is going to be the icons. So again, we're gonna create another div. I'm going to just call this, I'll just call this, let's see, action icons. So, because typically those kind of icons themselves, like when you see it's kind of like floating, it has a nice little hover, those are typically called floating action buttons. Okay, because typically you do something with it. It's an action. Okay, but for the action icons, what we'll do is we'll just simply create two divs. So div, and we'll give it, I guess, a class. And I'll just call this action icon 1. Then we'll call this action icon 2. And what do we want to do next is we want to just style this up a little bit. So what I can do is I'll just do this. Let's go into action icon 1, action icon 2. So they're gonna have a lot of similar styles. So for example, we'll have a width of 50 pixels, height of 50 pixels. We're gonna have different background colors for it, so don't worry, we're gonna change it. So let's see, we're gonna give it a display of flex. We're gonna go ahead and also justify the content to center as well as aligned items. So if you wanted to put like an icon, which I guess we could, then this will make sure it stays in the middle. Okay, and let's just give it a background color. I'll do blue so you guys can kind of just see what's there currently. All right, that's not really super visible, but I have a color over here that we can use. Okay, so that's the background color. We'll worry about the box shadow next, right over here. So I'll use a simple box shadow just to give that nice little hover effect. Okay, there you go. All right, and we can also change the other background color too. So for example, I can just go over to action icon 2. And I can change the background color. I have a color ready, so I'll just use this. I think this is a bluish color. Okay, there we go. Not the best color, but it looks great. Okay, so let's go over to action icons now. And we need to set this to display of flex. Okay, so that way you can see that they go on the same line. We'll also give some margin from the left, maybe like 2 pixels maybe. Actually, a little bit more. All right, now actually this is a little bit too much. All right, so let's see. We need to also give top section a display of flex as well, because right now these two are underneath each other. Well, one is on top of the next. So we need to actually set the display to flex. What's going on here? That's weird. Top section. Oh, I gave it an ID. There we go. Whoops. And let's align items to center, because you can kind of see that it was a little bit more shifted to the top. All right, and let's just justify the content, set it to space between, and there you go. Perfect. So now that we're done with the icons, again, you can put whatever you want over here. It doesn't really matter. You can even put a menu icon over here, and when you click on it, it'll toggle a menu. Okay, we're gonna move on. All right, now this next part is easy. We're just gonna simply put the H1 tag. So we'll just give this an H1. Let's say welcome back Arizona. We'll give it some styling too. Let's just give this a welcome title ID. Title. And for the welcome title, we'll give it a font size of maybe 24 pixels. We'll do font weight lighter, and then we'll give it, let's see, what else can we do? We'll give it a margin, because I don't really like how it's just so close to the search bar. We'll do 20 pixels. I don't really like it's a little bit too much, too close to the sidebar. So we get a 5 pixel margin from the left and right. And there we go. Okay. And there we go. It was that easy, right? So now let's move on to the last part of this tutorial. And that is going to be actually the most funnest part, in my opinion. This is going to be the grid part. Okay. Now we actually haven't used grids at all. So don't worry, I'm going to try my best to explain it to you as we go. But I'm assuming most of you guys probably ever use grids already. So let's go ahead and just get started. We're going to use a section, give an ID, and I'll just give this an ID of grid container. So this grid container is basically going to hold all of our what's called grid items. Now with grids, basically, they allow you to build powerful, responsive user interfaces in 2 dimensions. So if you need to have, let's say, multiple different squares or content that needs to be in not just let's say, for example, you don't want it to just be in one row. You want it to be also rows and columns, then you definitely want to use grids. If you try to use Flexbox, it's possible, but it's going to be ridiculously annoying to kind of like, resize everything and stuff. So that's why grids are perfect for two-dimensional responsive user interfaces. Let's go ahead and give ourselves 4 grid items. So I'll use a div for this. And what I'm going to do is I'll just give this a class grid item. And we're also going to just give, I guess, a second class called 1. Okay, I could use an ID, but I'll just make this quick. We're going to give this a class of 2, 3, and 4. So let me just go ahead and just label these. So item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. Okay, there we go. All right, so now let's go over here. Let's style our grid item. What I'll do is I'll give it a height of 350 pixels. So every one of them is going to have the same height. I'm going to give it a box shadow so we can kind of see what it looks like. So let's just do this for now. And again, I encourage you guys to change up the styling. You don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing. Again, this is just the layout. So I encourage you guys to actually change up some stuff. We're going to give it a border radius of 15 pixels. Actually, I'll do 25 pixels. Let's do a box sizing of border box because we're going to give it some padding. And we'll do a padding of 50 pixels. There we go. So what we want to do now is we actually want to set this grid container. We want to give it a display of grid because right now nothing is happening. So let's just give it a display of grid. And what we need to do next is we need to go ahead and set the column size. So to do that, we can use grid template columns. And you can actually set whatever size you want for each column. So for example, you want to do 500 pixels, you can do that. Okay. If you want to also set it for 3 columns, you can also do it as well. Okay, you can play around with it. Okay, so basically this allows us to have 3 columns. Okay, you can also set the sizes of rows too. It's up to you. But we also did not set a fixed width for grid item. So that's why we can actually just freely, do something like 75% auto. And now you can see that it will just take up 75% of the entire, I guess you can call this a viewport, and then the rest will be auto. Now I want that spacing in between, so I'll give it a grid gap of, let's do 25 pixels. Okay, and there you go. So now you can place whatever content you want. You can place like, a chart. You can place the balance of the user. You can place their recent payment history, transaction history. You can place their, recent payment method or whatever it is that you want. So the whole point of this tutorial is to show you guys how to get this nice, UI layout with grid systems. So let's also make sure that this is responsive as well. So for example, if I were to resize this, you can see that this would end up being not readable because it just looks really like condensed. So let's fix that. So to make sure it's responsive, we're going to use a media query. So let me actually just move this more to the left. So to use a media query, use the @ symbol, media, and we need to make sure we set a width on when the actual web page should actually respond. So we're going to use just a width of 1400 pixels. You can use whatever you want. What I would suggest you do is you open up the Chrome DevTools and resize your app, your page, and then you look at the width of the page as it's being resized. And if you don't like how it looks at said width, then that's the width that you want to use to make sure that that is what you're going to end up changing so that the entire page is actually responsive. Okay, so what we're going to do is whenever the width is 1400 pixels, we're going to set the grid containers grid template columns, and we're just going to set this to 100%. Okay, so basically this is just going to create one column. So if I resize, you can see that everything is just in one column now. Okay, so of course, you can resize certain things if you want. You don't have to necessarily do this. You can also just resize, this div over here if you don't like it. But now you can see over here, bam. Okay, now item 2 just goes on here. And you can also control where every single thing goes. So for example, I can directly take item number 2, and I can actually set the grid row. I think this is how you do it. I think I can set it to 2, I think, or 4. Yep, there you go. See? So if I move this here, set item 2 to grid row 3, that'll move it to row number 3. If you want to set it to grid row 1, see how that just moves up there? So you can play around with it. Okay, grids are very, very powerful, and you can do that with 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. Whatever grid item you want to, use, you can play around with it. Okay. All right, so that's going to be pretty much it for this grid part. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is the sidebar. Remember, I told you that when we resize it, we want to make sure the width collapses. So let's work on that. For the breakpoints, or the width that we want it to respond to, we'll use 950 pixels. And all we're going to do is we're first going to get rid of the text. So that's fairly easy. You just go all the way up here. You look at the title container, and you want to target the H1. So title container, H1, display none. Okay, and if you resize it, you can see that it's gone. And we want to make sure that this logo is all the way to the left. We'll worry about that in just a sec. Let's get rid of the links, the link text. So we'll go ahead and reference links. And we want to target the span. So we'll just set that to display of none. Okay. And we can then also set the sidebar, the width to 75 pixels, or whatever you want. Okay, and you can see that the icon will just stay right over there. And now we want to make sure we fill this gap over here. So since we set main dashboard contents margins left to the width of the sidebar, which was 300 pixels, I think, right? It was 300, right? So now we're just going to set it to whatever the width of the sidebar currently is, which is 75% or 75 pixels. So let's do that, and that'll just move it more to the left. So margin left, 75 pixels. And there you go. Okay. So if I resize, bam, there you go. Now, obviously, one more thing that I'll let you guys do is you guys can get rid of these icons, or you can move it to, the bottom. You can set the flex direction of this flex box to columns if you want. I'll let you guys take care of that. Now let's go ahead and add the animation, and that'll be pretty much it for this tutorial. So for the animation, we can go to sidebar, and we can set transition, and I can just do the time, so the duration of the transition, so 400 milliseconds, and we'll do width. Okay, so now if you look over here, you can see it just kind of slides through. You can make it a little bit faster if you want. 400 milliseconds might be a little bit too slow. And let's also put a transition for the margin left, which we can also do. We should be able to. So transition, we'll do 400 milliseconds, margin left. Okay, so now you can kind of see it just moves along with it. Though I think maybe for the sidebar text, I kind of want it to be a little bit faster, I guess. There you go. Looks nice. And there you have it. So now you have a dashboard that works on the web, on the browser, and if you wanted to have your users use this for mobile, they could. Okay, so for you guys, I think this should be pretty much it for the tutorial. Feel free to leave a like, leave a comment down below. If you guys have any suggestions, also leave a comment down below as well. Please also share this video because it does help the channel out a lot, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace out.